As we get into tuning, you may want to bookmark this page or save it because you'll probably want to come back to it because this is a really important lesson. Okay? If you have a head that's worn out or it has dents in it or anything like that, it's time to replace it. So I've already loosened the tension rods here so I can take this off. When we put the head on, we want to make sure that it is making contact with that shell all the way around. And then you place your counter hoop on top, and you want to make sure the head is in the position that you want. I always put the logo away from me. Again, if your drum is old, the tension rods might be a little crusty and rusty, so you might need to clean them in some cleaning solution or something like that. And then with older drums especially, it's a good idea to put a little bit of lubrication on the tension rod. So just a tiny little bit on the end, and then you can start to put it in like that. Some people like to do that with new drums as well, but it's just going to help you to keep everything clean and everything moving easily. Once your head is seated and your hoop is on, make sure that your tension rods are aligned with your lugs, and you can start putting them in just a little bit at a time. I like to get each one of them going just a touch before I even start to tighten them. So once you're at this point and they're all in, you can start tuning with your fingers and just getting them down finger tight. We'll skip this process so you don't have to sit through it, but get all the lugs just down just as tight as your fingers can go without wrenching on them, just finger tight. Now that we've got all the tension rods finger tight, we're ready to start tuning. So the most important thing you need is a drum key. Now let's talk about the pattern. It's important to go wherever you start, you cross over. So this particular drum has 10 lugs. So I tend to start right here at this lug where I play my left hand, and I might just give that like a half turn. So then I will cross over to the lug across from that and do the same thing. And then I will skip a lug going counterclockwise, half turn, across from there, so if you come to a lug that starts to feel like it's really loose, which happens from time to time just when the head is sort of settling in, like this one. Okay, so this lug is looser, this tension rod is looser than all the others have been so far. So I'm going to give it just a little bit extra to catch it up, because every once in a while that happens. Another thing, as you're going, you'll want to press into the head a little bit before it gets too tight. So this is still pretty loose. Press in, you can use one hand or two, and just make sure that the tension is pretty consistent all the way around. One other thing I like to do feel-wise is just press around and feel the tension and see if there's a spot like right here. That lug, you probably can't see it, but it drops a little bit lower than these do, which tells me that that lug needs just a little bit of attention. But if you're at home and you're alone and it's quiet, what I like to do is I'll put my finger in the middle to really isolate the sound of the lugs. Okay? So do-dee-dee-doo. You hear that kind of melody? So if my melody is do-dee-dee-doo, I'll take the do's up to the, right? So that means the lower notes will go up. So that's this, this, and this lug need to come up. We're getting pretty close. Pretty close, pretty consistent. So that's pretty close to in tune on the head, and it's in a range where I like to have it. It's pretty tight. It's not tabletop tight, and it's not super loose, but it's sounding pretty good. So that's a good starting point for me. If you want to practice tuning, get your drum in tune, get it sounding good, and then detune it all the way and do it again and do it again a bunch of times in a row. Most drummers, we have a tendency, once it sounds good, just leave it. And then it's 6 months of the same tuning, like, okay, it's fine, and then you change the head. So if you detune it and try it over and over again, you get a lot more experience actually practicing tuning in that way. Let's talk about tuning the bottom head. If it's dented up or beat up, you should definitely replace it. And to be able to do that, you're going to have to take off the snare wires. So on a modern drum, you can use a drum key and loosen the butt plate or the throw off side, it doesn't matter. And then take one side off and slide that head out. Now you can tension your bottom head or your batter side head and your bottom head to the same tension, or you can have the top tighter and the bottom looser, or the bottom tighter and the top looser. Really what you need to do is experiment with that and see what sound and feel you like. You're going to get a different snare response with the amount of tension on the bottom, and you're also going to get a little bit of a different pitch and a little bit of a different response overall. Once both heads are on and tensioned in a way that you like, you're going to need to put the snare wires back on. Now it's important to have them centered right without being too far one way or the other while the throw-off is engaged. So don't fall in the trap of centering them and then you pull the throw-off on and it pulls them all the way out this way. Make sure that when the throw-off is on, it's centered. And then another thing to pay attention to is make sure the snares are touching the bottom head. The wires are touching the bottom head. I have seen people put these on upside down, and when that happens, the parts of the wires are touching, but not the entire wires themselves. And the final thing about the snare wires is every once in a while, especially on an older drum, one of the wires might be a little loose or bent or sticking up or something like that, and it will respond in a totally different way from the rest of the wires. If that is happening, you can just take that one and get a little wire cutters and just snip it off. It won't make much of a difference to have one missing. Now that the drum is in tune and the snare wires are in the right place, you can adjust the tension on those wires a little bit to dial in the sound even more. So listen to what it sounds like. Then a little bit looser. If you go too far loosening, you get that kind of junky sound. Back up. A little tighter. Now if you go too tight, you'll notice that if you play real quietly, you don't quite get the right response from the snares. It's where you hear the pitch of the drum more than you hear the snares. So back that off a little bit, and then you've got snare response at a low dynamic. So experiment with it and get a sound that you like. You'll notice when you hear this that there's a lot of ring. Once the drum is in tune, it rings quite a bit. You do want resonance in your snare drum sound, but a certain ring or a certain frequency might be driving you crazy. So there are a lot of different ways that you can mute up the drum from just a tiny little bit. Something like a moon gel or a dot or some sort of thing like that will give you a little bit of mute, or even a little piece of gaff tape. Duct tape will leave a mark on the drum head. Gaff tape won't leave as much of a mark. But there are many things on the market as well. This is called the SNARE weight. This is a company that makes these weighted mutes so that when you play the drum, they don't move around or anything. They actually have a magnet that attaches to the hoop. So the difference in sound is definitely noticeable compared to, right? And then probably the next step would be something like this. This is called a Roots EQ. Other companies make these out of plastic as well, and each one has a little bit of a different sound. The thicker the ring is, the more it's going to mute the sound of the drum. So again, without it and with it, much more dead, right? Going even further to the dead side, this is a company called Big Fat Snare Drum. This, as you can see, it's a plastic ring, but it's much thicker than the Roots EQ. So I'll give you both sounds. With, much more dead. Now the last sound is another big fat snare drum. You can also take an old drum head of the same diameter and just cut it out and throw it on the drum. This will totally change the sound. It even drops the pitch of the drum. So really different. Now, you can also use, like the old school guys used to use tea towels. This is a sham from like an automotive store. And the benefit of something like this is that you can adjust the amount of muting very easily just by moving it around. So listen, I'll move it as I play. You can have just a little bit or much more. So you can even just take a little cloth, something that's light and thin, and move it to wherever you want. And then I just use these basic clips so that when I get it where I like the sound, I use these clips so that it won't move while I'm playing. I would advise you to avoid just throwing a towel over the drums. That's going to really change the feel, and it's going to change the rebound that you get. There are a bunch of products that we'll talk about if you want to reduce the volume of your drums. There are products that will do that, but a towel or something like that over it will totally change the way it feels, and it'll change the way you play. It's important more than anything else that you just experiment with tuning. There are many different methods for doing it, and as you can see, there are so many options for muffling and for tuning and for heads and for all these different things. So I am confident that you, with some experimentation, will be able to find something that you absolutely love that inspires you to play.